Welcome back to Chapter 7, Climate and Biodiversity. This is Part 2. We left off with biomes as natural capital and human impacts. We talked about deserts, temperate grasslands, and tundras. Now we're going to move on to tropical rainforests and temperate deciduous forests. So, tropical rainforests are the big one when we're talking about biomes as natural capital. They have a huge amount of biodiversity. They are only 2% of the surface of the Earth, but they have at least, if not more, than 50% of the known terrestrial plant and animal species. That doesn't even include insects and microbes. We use this biodiversity to help develop prescription drugs, especially when looking at tropical plants. Now, tropical rainforests don't have fertile soil because it gets recycled too quickly. This lack of fertile soils doesn't stop increasing logging for farming or raising cattle. So even though the area that they're logging to clear for farming and raising cattle isn't very good for it, they're still doing it anyway. This loss of tropical plants could accelerate the atmospheric warming as there are less plants to help with the removal of atmospheric CO2. So, rainforests, only 2% of surface, huge impact on the climate and the earth, along with giving us lots of natural capital. Temperate deciduous forests are the most disturbed biome. Most of it has been converted into where we live. Washington used to be a combination of swampland and temperate deciduous forests. If we destroyed all of the buildings and gave the area around DC time, in about 100 to 200 years, we would be back to forests around here after going through the succession process, which we'll get into when we go back to Chapter 5, Section 3. Now, mountains are not their own biome, but they're important. They cover 1/4 of the land's surface, and they have a drastic change in altitude, slope, soil, climate, and vegetation over a short distance. So you can actually get a lot of different biomes in a very, very small amount of space. 17% of the world's population lives on or at the base of mountains. These mountains become an island of biodiversity with endemic species, which means they only occur in that one space. So on that one mountain, you might have a certain type of insect. Or they become sanctuaries for hardy organisms. Goats that have been displaced by human impacts will climb further up the mountain and survive higher up where the humans don't bother to try and make their towns. Now, when we're talking about mountains and why they're important, let's talk about what they do for us and what they do for the world. Mountains are critical to the hydrologic cycle. They store water in the wintertime in the frozen water, aka ice and snow, which is gradually released in the spring and summer for use further down the mountain or in the surrounding areas for humans or other organisms. And that's where you get the idea of mountain-fed streams, because they aren't streams that are fed by springs from going down into the aquifers. It's specifically fed by snowmelt. Now, mountaintop glaciers and snowpacks are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, which lowers food production in the surrounding areas because the snowmelt that they were depending on to be able to water their crops with in the summertime melted in the early spring. This causes people to move elsewhere looking for places to grow their crops. Even though mountains are pretty important, they're not very high on our protection watch. If you want a specific example of this, go and look up Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa and glacier melt over time. You can see pictures from back in the 1800s, early 1900s, and Kilimanjaro has a pretty big glacier and snowpack on its top. You look at pictures of it now, it's hardly even there. And Mount Kilimanjaro was the main source of water for people living on and around that area. Now, if we look at continuing to look at human impacts, 62% of terrestrial ecosystems are being degraded or used unsustainably as we speak. This means that we are screwing up over half, almost 2/3 of the terrestrial ecosystems that we have access to. This can also be a problem because you can have one type of biome replace another. That example of burning down or logging tropical rainforests to create croplands or cattle grazing lands, a lot of that area doesn't end up getting taken back over by tropical rainforests. If you aren't careful, it gets taken over by grasslands, and grasslands are not nearly as biodiverse, and they won't actually be able to deal with the CO2 like tropical rainforests can. So it's actually a pretty big problem to have tropical rainforests be replaced by grasslands. So environmental scientists are calling for protecting these remaining wild areas and restoring damages to biomes. But the economics of timber, minerals, fossil fuels, and other resources in those locations can cause controversy over this. If you have an impoverished nation and they really need to be able to sell something to other countries to be able to feed their population, they're going to go, I don't care that I have this wonderful tropical rainforest. I'm going to cut it down so that I can grow crops to feed my people. There's been a recent switch in a couple South Pacific islands that have they're islands, but they have this great rainforest biome where they're actually getting other countries to pay them to keep these wild areas clear, which is really cool when you think about it, because it's people in affluent countries who have a tendency to get that affluenza, to have money to burn, realizing that instead of spending money on things, they can really help do positive impacts on the world by being able to help these developed countries or developing countries to support their economies and support their populations by protecting these wild areas. So there are some places where that is getting balanced out, but there's still a lot of areas where this controversial trade-off is going on. So this ends part 2 and finishes the lecture on chapter 7, Climate and Biodiversity. There are going to be a few assignments posted, and I hope you guys have a good rest of the day.